The morning sun glistened across Lake Davenport, a wide stretch of blue water cradled by tall pines and clusters of suburban homes. The lake was quiet, broken only by the sound of ducks drifting lazily and the faint hum of a fisherman's boat far in the distance. On the eastern shore, a two-story brick house stood proudly, its wooden dock stretching out like an arm into the water. At the end of that dock rested a sleek, pearl-white vessel, a 30-foot cabin cruiser named Eleanor Grace. The boat wasn't just fiberglass and steel. To its owner, Marcus Reed, it was the reward of a lifetime's worth of sweat, long nights, and sacrifices. A man in his early 40s with a calm presence and sharp eyes, Marcus had grown up knowing what it meant to be denied, to be told something wasn't for him. The boat was his answer to that. His sanctuary. His declaration that yes, he belonged here, on this lake, in this neighborhood, no matter what anyone whispered. And they whispered plenty. The Homeowners Association of Davenport Shores was a force unto itself. HOA President Linda Carver, a woman in her late 50s with sharp blonde hair and sharper words, had always carried a quiet resentment toward Marcus. To her, Marcus wasn't just another resident. He was an outsider, a man who had moved into their neighborhood with confidence, who owned more than most of them did, and who never bowed his head when challenged. Marcus kept his distance. He had grown used to the petty letters about his lawn being too natural, the sideways comments about his guests, and the HOA's constant attempts to regulate his dock. He responded with a smile, but inside, he carried a ledger. Every slight, every unnecessary rule, every veiled insult, he kept them stored. On this particular Friday morning, Marcus was preparing for a business trip to Atlanta. He moved through his house with purpose, suitcase rolling behind him. His teenage daughter, Jasmine, sat at the kitchen table, scrolling her phone while sipping orange juice. "You locked the boat?" she asked without looking up. Marcus chuckled, sliding his blazer onto his shoulders. "Double locked. And covered. Don't worry, baby girl, nobody's touching Eleanor Grace." Jasmine smirked. "Good. You know how nosy these people are." Marcus kissed the top of her head before grabbing his keys. "That's why we don't give them any excuses." By noon, his car disappeared down the winding road, leaving the house still and the dock quiet. The boat rested like a jewel in the sun, safe, secure, and watched over by the water itself. Or so Marcus thought. Across the neighborhood, Linda Carver leaned against her kitchen window, staring at that very boat. She had always hated how it shined on the lake, how people whispered about Marcus's beautiful yacht. It was a reminder that he had something she didn't, something that, in her mind, he didn't deserve. Her phone buzzed. "Everything set for tomorrow?" a friend's voice asked. Linda smirked. "Almost. I've got the wine, the food, the playlist. All we need is, well, the venue." A pause. "You're not thinking." "Why not?" Linda cut her off. "He's gone. He won't even notice. That boat's just sitting there, collecting dust. We'll bring it back exactly how it was. No harm done." Her friend hesitated, but Linda had already made up her mind. In her world, rules were for other people. She was the president of the HOA. In her eyes, that gave her not only authority over Marcus but entitlement to everything within the neighborhood's boundaries. The plan was simple: tomorrow night, they'd untie Eleanor Grace, take her out for a private HOA social, and return before Marcus came back. Simple. Clean. Harmless. Or so she believed. That evening, the lake took on a golden hue as the sun melted into the horizon. Neighbors watered their lawns, kids rode bikes along the cul-de-sacs, and a group of HOA board members gathered quietly at Linda's house. Wine glasses clinked as the women laughed, dressed in summer dresses, while the men bragged about their golf scores. At the center of it all, Linda stood like a conductor ready to raise her baton. "Tomorrow," she whispered, her eyes glinting with mischief. "We're going to show everyone how it feels to truly live on this lake. No one dared to question her again. Outside, Eleanor Grace rocked gently against her ropes, the lake's dark water lapping against her hull. She was waiting, patient, as if knowing the storm was about to come. And so, with Marcus miles away in Atlanta, the stage was set. By tomorrow night, his beloved boat wouldn't be resting quietly on the dock. It would be carrying his enemies into the heart of the lake, under the watchful eyes of the Coast Guard, and toward a humiliation none of them would ever forget. Saturday morning bloomed hot and restless. The lake shimmered beneath a haze of rising heat, the kind of day meant for cool drinks, shade, and quiet. But the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Something was happening tonight, something only a select few were invited to. Inside her home, Linda Carver moved with the energy of a general preparing for battle. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her voice carried sharp commands as she directed the HOA board members. Bring the wine coolers down to the dock. Make sure we have enough plastic cups. We're not leaving evidence. And somebody grabbed the Bluetooth speaker. Her husband, Richard, shuffled behind her, red-faced and sweating. Linda, maybe we should rethink this, he mumbled, setting down a cooler. It's one thing to host at the clubhouse, but taking the man's boat? That's... Linda spun on him. Richard. He doesn't even use it half the time. It's wasted on him. We're doing him a favor, keeping it from rotting on the dock. Besides, her smile sharpened, who's going to stop us? Richard didn't answer. He knew better. By twilight, a small group of HOA members gathered at Marcus Reed's dock. They dressed like vacationers, floral shirts, sundresses, wide hats, carrying bottles and platters as if boarding a cruise. The irony wasn't lost on some of them. Linda, whispered Marcia, one of the more timid board members, what if he finds out? Linda brushed past her with a laugh. He's in Atlanta. Relax. By the time he's back, Eleanor Grace will be right here, tied up exactly where she was. No one will know. The problem was, Marcus had been meticulous with his boat. The locks were heavy, the cover secured tight. But Linda had already solved that problem. She snapped open her purse and produced a small silver key. HOA rules, remember, she said smugly. Emergency access to property in case of community need. I had a copy made years ago. The dock fell silent. Everyone stared at her, half impressed, half horrified. With a triumphant smirk, Linda bent down and unlocked the cover. The canvas peeled back, revealing Eleanor Grace in all her glory, polished decks, shining chrome rails, and a cabin that smelled faintly of cedar and sea salt. The group gasped. It was like stepping into another world. She's beautiful, someone whispered. Yes, Linda said, her voice dripping with pride as if the boat were hers. Tonight, she's ours. The engine roared to life just after dark, startling a flock of geese off the water. Linda stood at the helm, one manicured hand gripping the wheel as if she had been born to captain. The others crowded around with drinks in hand, music thumping from the Bluetooth speaker. Laughter and chatter spilled into the night, echoing across the lake. They cruised out from the dock, lights twinkling on the shoreline behind them. The boat cut through the water smoothly, powerful, steady. For a moment, even the skeptics among them felt the thrill of it. To Marcus, one of the men toasted, raising his plastic cup. The others laughed, clinking their drinks together. But beneath the laughter, there was unease. They knew this wasn't theirs. Every glass of wine, every burst of music was borrowed time. And borrowed things, sooner or later, must be returned. As they drifted farther from the neighborhood, the lake widened into open water. Other boats dotted the distance, fishermen, families, couples under the moonlight. Nobody paid much attention to Eleanor Grace, but Linda still felt a spark of vanity swell in her chest. People were looking. People were seeing her at the helm of the grandest vessel on Davenport Lake. Take a picture of me, she demanded, posing dramatically with one hand on the wheel, the other stretched toward the horizon. Flashbulbs lit the deck. She laughed like a queen. The others began dancing, shouting, spilling drinks across the immaculate deck. Someone tried the cabin's leather seats. Another fiddled with Marcus's carefully tuned sound system. It wasn't long before the polished sanctuary began to look like a college frat party. Richard sat near the back, his jaw tight, eyes darting nervously. He sipped his beer without tasting it. Every splash of water against the hull made him flinch. He didn't belong here. None of them did. And then, a sound cut through the music. A low, steady hum. Growing louder. Marcia's glass froze halfway to her lips. What's that? Out of the darkness, a pair of bright lights glided across the water, cutting directly toward them. The rhythmic churn of powerful engines grew nearer. Richard's eyes widened. That's the Coast Guard. Panic rippled through the group. Music cut off, voices dropped into frantic whispers. Linda tightened her grip on the wheel, her painted nails digging into the leather. Relax, she hissed. They're just making rounds. We look like any other group enjoying the lake. But her voice lacked its usual conviction. Her heart hammered in her chest as the vessel drew closer, its spotlight sweeping across the water. The Coast Guard boat slowed, circling near Eleanor Grace. A voice rang out over a loudspeaker. Vessel Eleanor Grace. This is the U.S. Coast Guard. Cut your engine. The HOA froze. Cups slipped from hands, rolling across the deck. The music speaker was quickly shoved into a bag. Richard's face went pale. Linda forced a smile, though sweat trickled down her temple. She eased the throttle back until the boat bobbed gently in the water. The Coast Guard vessel pulled alongside, its crew standing tall in uniforms, flashlights sweeping across the deck. Evening, folks, an officer called. Nice night for a ride. Can we see your registration and captain's license, please? All eyes turned to Linda. She swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. Oh, of course, she stammered, fumbling through her purse. But she had nothing. No registration. No license. No proof of ownership. Her hand shook as she tried to steady her voice. This is my boat. The officer's flashlight lingered on her face, then shifted to the boat's side, where the name Eleanor Grace gleamed in neat gold letters. He scribbled something into his notepad. Ma'am, he said slowly, this vessel is registered to a Marcus Reed. Are you Marcus Reed? The deck went silent. Even the water seemed to hold its breath. Linda's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time in her reign as HOA president, she had nothing to say. The Coast Guard officer narrowed his eyes, waiting for an answer. The party guests looked at Linda with dawning horror. And in that moment, under the blinding spotlight, her stolen crown slipping, Linda realized the night wasn't going to end with laughter. It was going to end with consequences. The spotlight lingered on the stolen boat, its beam cutting across every face on deck. The HOA members squirmed under its glare like insects pinned for inspection. Music no longer pulsed, laughter no longer filled the air, only the sound of waves slapping the hull, a rhythm that grew louder with every heartbeat. Ma'am, the Coast Guard officer repeated, his voice steady but edged with suspicion. Are you Marcus Reed? Linda's throat worked, but no sound came. She gripped the wheel tighter, nails digging into the leather as if she could hold her lie in place with sheer force. I'm his neighbor, she finally said, her voice brittle. We're just borrowing the boat. The word slipped out before she could stop it. Borrowing. The officer's flashlight swung back to her, locking onto her like a predator spotting weakness. Borrowing, he echoed, stepping closer. Do you have written permission from the owner? Behind her, the guests shifted uneasily. Marcia clutched her purse like a lifeline. Richard muttered something under his breath, his face pale and glistening with sweat. Linda forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, not written, but I'm the HOA president. We have certain rights, you see. Community access." The Coast Guard officer raised a brow, unimpressed. "Community access does not extend to commandeering private vessels. Step away from the wheel, ma'am." The order cut through the night like a blade. Linda froze, her fingers tightening, her authority slipping through her grasp like water. "I said step away," the officer repeated, firmer this time. Reluctantly, Linda released the wheel and stumbled back, her composure cracking. The spotlight shifted, sweeping across the faces of the others. Each looked more guilty than the last. "Names," another officer barked, clipboard in hand. "Full names. Everyone on board." The party guests exchanged nervous glances. One by one, they mumbled their names, voices trembling, as the officer jotted them down. When it came to Richard, he spoke louder than the rest, almost as if to distance himself from his wife. "Richard Carver," he said. "Her husband. I told her this was a bad idea." Linda's head snapped toward him, eyes wide with fury, but Richard wouldn't meet her gaze. The officer continued. "And how long have you all been on this vessel?" "Just a couple hours," Marcia blurted, wringing her hands. It was supposed to be a neighborhood gathering." The officer scribbled again, then turned back to Linda. "Ma'am, this boat is not yours. Operating without proper registration and permission is a serious violation. We'll need to conduct a full inspection." "No!" Linda shouted, louder than she intended. The deck went silent again. Her voice cracked, desperation leaking through her polished veneer. "You don't understand. He doesn't even appreciate this boat. He leaves it here, week after week, letting it sit. We were just giving it life." The officer studied her for a long, tense moment. His silence was louder than any reprimand. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "Entitlement is not an excuse for theft," he said. The words hit her like a slap. The inspection began. Officers boarded Eleanor Grace, flashlights probing every corner, the cabin, the compartments, the deck. They documented everything, the spilled drinks, the scuffed floors, the disarray left by the careless party. Every mark was another nail in Linda's coffin. One officer returned, holding up a nearly empty wine bottle. "Open container on board. That's another violation." Another officer chimed in. "This stereo system's been tampered with. Clearly not how the owner left it." The guests shifted in shame. Their night of indulgence had transformed into an interrogation under the harsh light of authority. Finally, the lead officer returned to Linda. "Ma'am, at this point, we have multiple violations: unauthorized use of a registered vessel, lack of license, unsafe operation, and alcohol consumption on board. Do you understand the severity of this?" Linda tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She nodded stiffly, her chin trembling. The officer's expression softened just slightly, but his words remained firm. "You'll be filing an official report. And the owner will be contacted immediately." The air on deck grew heavier, almost suffocating. Marcus Reed's name hung there like a shadow, looming larger than the boat itself. By the time the Coast Guard released them, the party was over in every sense. The officers had escorted Eleanor Grace back toward the dock, making sure every eye in the neighborhood could see the shameful return. Lights flicked on in houses along the shore. Curtains shifted. Neighbors peered out, whispers already spreading like wildfire. The proud HOA president, dragged home under escort, caught red-handed on a boat that wasn't hers. The moment they reached Marcus's dock, the officers secured the vessel and took final notes. "We'll be filing a full report," the lead officer said. His gaze lingered on Linda. "Expect to hear from both us and Mr. Reed very soon." The HOA members shuffled off the boat in silence, their party clothes now symbols of humiliation. No one looked at Linda. No one thanked her. They scattered like rats from a sinking ship. Only Richard remained, standing a few feet away, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His disappointment was a weight heavier than any Coast Guard fine. Linda stood frozen on the dock, her body trembling, her face pale beneath the moonlight. For years, she had ruled this neighborhood with smug authority. Tonight, she had been reduced to nothing more than a thief caught in the act. And the worst part hadn't even arrived yet. Marcus Reed still didn't know. Somewhere in a hotel room in Atlanta, Marcus scrolled through his phone, unaware that pictures of his beloved Eleanor Grace, packed with drunk HOA members under the Coast Guard spotlight, were already circulating through the neighborhood. By the time he returned, the whispers would have turned into a storm. The airport was busy when Marcus Reed stepped off the plane Sunday evening, but he moved with the calm ease of a man used to traveling. His suitcase rolled smoothly behind him, his phone buzzing with notifications. He ignored most of them, until he noticed the same message appearing again and again. "Marcus, you need to see this. They used your boat. Check the neighborhood group chat." His brow furrowed. He slipped into a quiet corner, thumb swiping across the screen until the photos appeared. At first, he couldn't process what he was seeing. Blurred flashes of light. Faces he recognized, HOA members, their plastic cups raised in drunken cheer. And behind them, unmistakable even in the grainy night shots, was Eleanor Grace. Marcus's jaw clenched. He scrolled further, another picture. This one sharper. The Coast Guard spotlight blazing across his deck, officers standing tall while Linda Carver shrank behind the wheel. The blood rushed in his ears. He closed his eyes, breathing slowly. He had learned long ago not to explode in the heat of the moment. Anger wasted energy. Precision delivered results. But inside, something burned. By the time Marcus's car turned into Davenport Shores, the neighborhood was buzzing like a hive after being struck. Curtains twitched as he passed. Porch lights flickered on. Whispers spread from lawn to lawn. He parked, stepped out, and stood for a moment staring at his dock. There she was, Eleanor Grace, tied exactly where he had left her. But she wasn't the same. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the scuff marks along the rail, the faint sticky sheen of spilled drinks on the deck. His sanctuary had been violated. Jasmine ran out of the house, phone in hand. "Dad! Did you see? Did you hear?" Marcus raised a hand, steady. "I saw. I heard. Now tell me everything you know." She launched into the story, piecing together what she'd gathered from texts and posts. The HOA had thrown a party. They'd taken the boat. The Coast Guard caught them. By now, half the town was gossiping. When she finished, Marcus said nothing for a long time. He walked slowly down the dock, every step deliberate. He placed a hand on the rail of Eleanor Grace, feeling the cool metal beneath his palm, as if listening to her wounds. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "They thought this was theirs. They thought I wouldn't find out." Jasmine hesitated. "What are you gonna do?" Marcus turned to her. His eyes were sharp, unblinking. "I'm going to make sure they never forget whose boat this is." The next morning, Marcus began his quiet investigation. He contacted the Coast Guard, requesting a copy of the incident report. The officer on the line recognized his name immediately. "Mr. Reed, yes. We'll have the report ready. I should warn you, your vessel was found in less than ideal condition. You may want to file for damages." Marcus thanked him calmly, though his hand tightened around the phone. Later, a neighbor named Tom stopped by. Tom was one of the few who had always treated Marcus with respect, often chatting on the dock about fishing or the weather. "Marcus," Tom said carefully, "I thought you should know. I've got video. They didn't see me, but I recorded when they left the dock." Whole group of them, laughing like fools. If you need it. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. I'll need it. Piece by piece, the evidence came together, the Coast Guard report, the photos, the videos, the witnesses. Marcus assembled it like a craftsman shaping steel. This wasn't going to be a shouting match at an HOA meeting. This was going to be justice, precise and undeniable. That evening, Marcus stood at his window, watching the neighborhood. He could see Linda Carver's house across the street, its curtains drawn tight. Inside, no doubt, she was scrambling, calling board members, spinning stories, trying to contain the wildfire. But it was too late. Jasmine approached quietly. You could just, let it go, Dad. You don't have to fight them. Marcus turned, his face softening for her. Baby girl, if it were just about the boat, maybe. But this isn't the first time they've crossed the line. They've been trying to put me in my place since the day I moved here. Well, he looked back out at the lake, his voice steady as iron. It's time they learned I have a place. And it's not beneath them. The following day, Marcus attended the HOA's scheduled board meeting. He walked into the clubhouse, every eye snapping toward him. The room was thick with tension. Linda sat at the head of the table, her posture stiff, her face carefully composed. Mr. Reed, she said, forcing a smile. We weren't expecting you. Marcus set a folder on the table. His calm voice carried through the room. I think you were. One by one, he laid out the documents. The Coast Guard report. The photographs. The neighbor's video. Each piece landed like a hammer. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Linda tried to speak, her words stumbling. This is being blown out of proportion. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Marcus cut in, his tone still even, but his eyes blazing. You stole my boat. You trespassed on my property. You endangered lives on the water. And you dragged the Coast Guard into it. Tell me, Linda, what part of that is a misunderstanding? Her face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came. Marcus leaned forward slightly. I'll give you a choice. Step down as president, and prepare for what's coming. Because I will not be silent. Not this time. The board members shifted uneasily. Some looked away. Others stared at Linda with new eyes, eyes that no longer saw her as untouchable. For the first time, the Queen of Davenport Shores sat cornered, her power slipping through her fingers. Marcus left the meeting without waiting for her answer. He didn't need to. He knew the storm had already broken. And when it was done, the HOA would never be the same, because the man they had tried to belittle now held every card. The neighborhood had never been so quiet. Word spread faster than wildfire, and by Monday evening, Davenport Shores felt less like a community and more like a jury box. Every porch light was on. Every conversation stopped when Marcus walked by. Inside her house, Linda Carver was unraveling. She had spent years cultivating her image, the poised, commanding president of the HOA, the woman who controlled every blade of grass and every drop of paint color in the neighborhood. Now she couldn't step outside without feeling eyes on her. Eyes that knew. Eyes that judged. But Marcus wasn't rushing. He wasn't shouting in the streets. He was moving with patience, the patience of a man who knew the truth was already enough. 2 days later, a letter landed in every mailbox in Davenport Shores. Not from Linda. Not from the HOA. From Marcus. It was calm, measured, and devastating. He outlined exactly what had happened, how the HOA president and several board members had trespassed on his property, stolen his boat, partied recklessly, and been intercepted by the Coast Guard. Attached were copies of the official report and still photos from that night. The letter didn't need anger. It didn't need embellishment. The facts alone were thunder. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, reading aloud, shaking their heads. Unbelievable. She always acted so high and mighty. He could have pressed charges already. By sunset, the whispers had become open condemnation. The fallout was swift. At the next HOA meeting, Linda walked into the clubhouse with her head held high, but her eyes betrayed her. The room was packed, residents filling every chair, every corner, arms folded and expressions cold. She began with her usual tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I'd like to address." "Step down," someone shouted from the back. Her face flickered. "Excuse me." "You heard me," the voice said firmly. "Step down. You embarrassed all of us." Others chimed in. "You stole from a neighbor. You dragged us into this mess. You've abused your position for years." The tide had turned. The authority she once wielded like a whip was gone. Every voice in the room rose against her, the same neighbors she had once cowed into silence. Finally, Marcus stood. He hadn't planned to speak, but the moment demanded it. "I didn't ask for this fight," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "But when someone crosses the line, when they take what isn't theirs and think they can get away with it, you can't stay silent. If it were anyone else's property, she would have done the same. Rules for you, none for her." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "This neighborhood can be better. But it won't happen under leadership that thinks theft is community service. You all deserve better. We all do." The room erupted in applause. Linda's face crumbled. She tried to argue, to protest, but her words were drowned out. By the end of the night, she was forced to resign, not just as president, but from the board entirely. But Marcus wasn't finished. Within weeks, he filed a civil suit against Linda and the other board members who had participated. The evidence was overwhelming. The Coast Guard's report was damning. Witness testimony sealed it. The case drew attention beyond Davenport shores. Local news ran the headline. HOA president caught using neighbor's boat for party, busted by Coast Guard. The public loved it. A symbol of arrogance brought down by her own entitlement. And at the center stood Marcus Reed, calm, dignified, refusing to be victimized. The settlement was steep. Linda was ordered to pay damages for the misuse of the boat, cover repairs, and issue a public apology. The other members involved were fined, and several quietly moved away within months, unable to face the humiliation. One quiet morning, Marcus stood again on his dock. The lake was still, the air fresh with pine. Eleanor Grace gleamed in the sunlight, restored, polished, whole again. Jasmine joined him, sipping from a mug of cocoa. "You really showed them, Dad." Marcus smiled faintly. "I didn't need to show them. They showed themselves." He stepped onto the deck, running his hand across the rail. For a moment, he thought of everything the boat had endured. The violation. The shame. The spotlight on the water. And yet here she was, steady and strong, just like him. Jasmine tilted her head. "Think they'll ever try something like that again?" Marcus looked out across the lake, where the water sparkled as if laughing in the sun. "Not twice," he said simply. He started the engine, the familiar hum filling the air. The boat eased away from the dock, slicing across the calm water. Neighbors paused on their porches to watch, not with envy, not with spite, but with something closer to respect. Marcus stood tall at the helm, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The lake belonged to no one, and yet in that moment, it felt like it was his. The HOA had tried to take his pride, his property, his place. Instead, they gave him something greater, a story that would be told long after Linda Carver was forgotten. And as Eleanor Grace glided forward, Marcus knew one truth that no one could steal: dignity doesn't need permission.